Thank you, Madam President. I rise to join my colleague, the senator from Louisiana, the chair of the Small Business Committee, and my colleague from Oregon, Senator Merkley, to talk about this very important issue that, frankly, you could say that you probably heard a lot from us before we left, but along with my colleague, Senator Murray, and I'm sure others like Senator Boxer, we all went home and heard from our constituents about this issue and how critical it was for us to pass this legislation. Now, I find it interesting, the pundits are all debating about whether this will have a political effect on the election. I can guarantee you that this has not been a focus for any of us about the election, but about helping small business. When Wall Street imploded nearly 2 years ago, 2 years ago is when small businesses needed our help and support. And many of us have been arguing literally this entire legislative calendar year to pass this legislation, only to have hurdle after hurdle put in front of us, or naysayers that say that it can't be done. So I truly hope we are on the precipice of passing this legislation because it is so critical for job creation in America. I know my colleagues have gone over these numbers, but just to be specific about it again one more time, because this is from the Department of Commerce, small business accounts for 60 to 70% of job creation. So we can talk about all the ideas that we want to have about how we're going to get out of this economic nightmare. We can talk about various policies that are going to help us or stimulate the economy. The bottom line is job growth by the private sector is going to help our economy, and that has to have a focus on small business. But what's happened to us instead? You can see that this is a chart from Small Business Lending, basically that is a 2008 number to a 2009. You can see, we know that we had an economic crisis, and we know that lending in general went down, but we see that small business lending went down even more dramatically. The consequence of that has been our engine of economic growth for job creation, small business, has been cut off. We have seen more lending to basically from large banks to large institutions, and some of those institutions doing the hiring, but they're not the basic driver of job growth in America. So this is what we're trying to right. We are trying to correct the fact that these small businesses have not had access to capital. I know my colleague Senator Murray and I went to a restaurant in Seattle, a pizzeria that's very popular, and met with many small businesses there. But this particular owner, Joe Fazer, who has a wonderful business, basically had opened 4 restaurants and then went to get more capital during this downturn and basically was told, no, it's too big of a risk. And he said, quote, honestly, I was shocked and deeply offended. I had a healthy, profitable business, a blemish-free history record of paying my loans in full, and now I was being told that I was risky after the decisions that were made on Wall Street and their risky activity. So in the end, Joe did everything he could with personal appeals and worked with community bankers and finally got his loan and then opened his new restaurant, which now employs 75 people. Joe was not the risk. Joe didn't participate in risky derivative activities on Wall Street. He didn't cook up this scheme. And yet here we are, 2 years later, finally coming to the aid and support of small businesses. So I heard many stories of this when I was at home, many small businesses who basically said, I hope that people on the other side of the aisle can set aside their differences and help get this legislation passed, that we need to do more. And I know that many of you may have seen today the report that was put out by the Joint Economic Committee, Small Business Employment and Bank Lending Restrains Job Creation. Basically, the summation of this, and I'll read from the report, is that it found that the result of tightening lending standards that were facing small businesses, that hiring at small firms continued to decline in 2009 and the early part of 2010, while hiring by large establishments, which had wider access to credit, began to pick up. So it's clear that small business hiring still remains flat. And the question is, what are we going to do about it? It's not about November 2nd. It's about whether you support giving access to capital to small businesses who had capital choked off from them because of the activities of Wall Street. Madam President, I clearly support and respect the engine of our economy that small businesses represent. I hope that people will put their differences aside. I appreciate my colleague from Ohio, Senator Voinovich, for his leadership, for his advocacy, for listening to the facts on this issue and understanding that these are the people that will help us out of this situation, and certainly we're not the ones that got us into it. So I hope that we'll move forward on this legislation, and this week we will pass it. I don't expect overnight things to change, but I do expect this, for this Congress, for the Senate, for the House, to say where our priorities are and to say where leveraged access to capital can really stimulate job growth in our economy. I thank the President, and I yield the floor.